One of the advantages of the ocean, it covers 70% of the Earth's surface. Actually, we have a huge amount of area, so the natural exchange that you therefore have between the atmosphere and the ocean is one of its great attributes. And the mechanism by which you're then going to remove the carbon dioxide, in effect, from the ocean, for example, by growing things, you're really deriving massive benefit from the incredibly natural area already provided. So that's a key feature, Paul, that I would really sort of herald as why we think ocean-based carbon dioxide removal needs a lot further investigation. It has great potential.
Everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'd like to welcome you all to this very important panel. For those of you who feel as though we're headed towards a place where there's no hope, it is my hope that this panel may help reverse some of those concerns. We'll be speaking on ocean-based carbon dioxide removal. And I want to introduce our illustrious panel. We have, to my left, Dr. Shaun Fitzgerald, who's Executive Director of the Center for Climate Repair at Cambridge. He's a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering and works with academic researchers, businesses in the realm of government policy and public engagement. To his left, we have Brad Ack, who is an environmental innovator whose work has spanned from the tropical forests of Latin America, the high deserts of the American Southwest, and the Pacific Northwest, to work throughout the global ocean. To his left, we have Natalie, Hilmi, and so Natalie works on the assessment of the socioeconomic impacts of climate change and ocean acidification, the assessment of ecosystems such as coral reefs, macroeconomics, economic policies, and sustainable development, organizing an international workshop on the economic impact of ocean acidification. Next, we have Ulfath Ibrahim, who's Assistant Director at the Special Envoy Office for Climate Change of the Maldives. She is a Blue Carbon researcher, a Chevening Scholar, and Australia Awards Scholar. And last but not least, Paul Beckwith, who's a climate systems scientist who has taught in university settings and also is a well-known YouTube climate science educator. And I'd like to start this panel off with Dr. Shaun Fitzgerald.
Thank you ever so much. The Centre for Climate Repair at the University of Cambridge has been set up for about 2 years now, and its purpose is indeed to look at how we might tackle climate change in an active way of repairing the climate. And our strategy is based on what we call the 3 R's. The first one is the most obvious, which is that we need to reduce emissions as rapidly as we can and as effectively as we can with a just purpose for all societies. However, we know that we are not going to be able to have a planet that's going to be habitable in the way that we are currently living if we just do reduction of emissions. Therefore, our second R is removal of greenhouse gases at scale. And our third R is tackling the issue of the timescale by which we're going to fix our climate on reducing and removing emissions and looking at ways we might need to reflect the radiation from the sun and refreeze the Arctic. Today's conversation and purpose of the session today is about removing of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, and in particular, the role of the oceans. The reason why we are looking at that within Cambridge is that we think that the largest opportunity that is underserved from a research purpose is indeed the role of the oceans. So the 2 projects that we are looking at from a research perspective at the moment within Cambridge are firstly, the potential role of giant kelp, but not just giant kelp in the coastal waters, but giant kelp in the surface waters of the deep ocean. It poses lots of opportunities. It poses lots of questions. and some risks as well. We don't really know what's going to happen when the giant kelp grows and some of it gets into the deep ocean. We have to undertake research into this area from not just modeling and data analysis, but also looking at experiments that are going to be needed to confirm the predictions from the modeling. The second area is looking at what actually we might do to regenerate the oceans. Our project is called Marine Biomass Regeneration, and we're looking at how we might be able to regenerate oceans. For example, the role of whales, and questioning what role they had previously in bringing nutrients from depth to the surface through their own bodily functions, feeding at depth and defecating at the surface. We've lost all of the whales in certain species. They're less than 1% in certain cases. And therefore, we need to undertake research at the moment, now urgently, in order to figure out how we might get those populations back and have the ocean regenerated and fulfilling its function, not just for the ocean and ecosystems, but fulfilling its function as a carbon sequestration source that it used to do that we don't currently have. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Brad. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaun. My name is Brad Ack. I'm the executive director of an organization called Ocean Visions, which is a collaborative partnership of research and scientific institutions with practitioners and marine managers that looks for solutions to critical problems facing the ocean. And there's no problem more critical and dangerous than the impacts caused by too much carbon in the atmosphere. The 2 trillion tons of CO2 that we've put into the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution are heating and acidifying the ocean. These are the 2 largest threats to the health of the ocean over time. And so working on things like carbon dioxide removal is not only good for the climate and not only imperative for the climate, but also for the health of the ocean itself. So essentially, we're looking at whether the ocean can play a role in healing itself and healing the climate. Shaun mentioned we have to have removal. The IPCC, scientific body for the UNFCCC, has said that every scenario to get to 1.5 degrees includes pretty significant amounts of removal, between 100 and 1,000 gigatons of carbon. A gigaton is 1 billion tons, so 100 billion tons to 1 trillion tons of carbon have to come back out of the atmosphere over the next 70 years to have any hope of getting to 1.5. How are we going to do it? The ocean holds about 50 times more carbon in the deep than what's in the atmosphere now. The ocean cycles most of the planet's free carbon. If we were to disappear tomorrow, the ocean would, over the next 100,000, 200,000 years, would recycle all this carbon pollution we've created. We don't have that kind of time, so we look at how can we accelerate, enhance, and mimic ocean pathways for carbon removal. There's a few big categories: giant kelp, macroalgae. Rapid photosynthesizer, doesn't require land or fertilizer, captures carbon. Many ways that you can store that carbon. Microalgae, also a rapid photosynthesizer that has unlimited potential to be able to move carbon, and already does move a massive amount of carbon in the system. To more engineered methods, alkalinity enhancement, adding alkalinity to ocean water to restore the pH that's been lowered by acidification, also has a knock-on effect of removing carbon. Direct ocean capture, which is essentially like direct air capture, but capturing carbon out of seawater itself. And then lastly, what everybody is aware of and knows about is blue carbon ecosystems. Those are the big 5 domains of ocean-based carbon removal. We're trying to accelerate research with partners like Cambridge on all 5 of those areas. And within each 5, there are many technology pathways. We need much greater urgency to this effort. Here we are at COP, and nobody in the negotiation room is talking about how countries are going to deliver that 100 to 1,000 gigatons of carbon. They're not talking about it. Even though it's in the science, it's not on the agenda. So we need to all collectively get it on the agenda. There's only 2 ways to solve this problem. We need both of them: reduce and remove. And we're falling far short on removal. If you want to learn more about some of these technology pathways, please visit oceanvisions.org/roadmaps, and you will find a wealth of information there about all of the different research efforts underway and how you can get involved and help. Thank you.
We know that the country is committed to be net zero by 2050. And I want to give you an image. You can imagine the planet as a bath tube. It's full of CO2. The faucet coming in is a flux of CO2. We have to reduce our emissions. But this will not be enough because the bath tube is already full. So we have to drain the CO2 that is already in the bath tube. One possibility is to use the technology. Another one is to use the nature. IPCC report said that nature can be one third of the solution. So if we keep our nature, we conserve it, this nature will also protect our climate. How can we do this? As an economist, we can do the economic evaluation of ecosystem services, because the ecosystem renders services to the humanity, and we can give them an economic value. So the ecosystem services will become what we call natural capital. And we want investors to put their money in the preservation, the conservation of those ecosystem services, of those ecosystems that give the services. And to do that, we have two possibilities: the public investors, the government, and also the private sectors. For example, if we take the blue carbon ecosystems, like mangrove, salt marshes, seagrass, but also the open ocean and the deep sea, because this is also blue carbon, we can give them a value, and investors can protect them, and they know that because of the price of carbon that is going up on the carbon market, their money will come back to them. So it is a profitable investment, profitable for the investors, but especially for the whole planet and the humanity. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I come from the Maldives, so 99% of the Maldivian territory is ocean. And like many island communities, we have a very strong connection with our ocean. The Maldives already experience the effects of the climate crisis. It is not by choice that we are positioned at the front lines of this battle. However, we are determined to fight it, and that is why, in that spirit, the Maldivian government has set an ambitious target to reach net zero by 2030, on the condition that we can achieve international support from our partners. The ocean is oftentimes only thought as a victim of the climate crisis, but for the Maldives, we have nowhere else but the ocean to look for solutions. And so for us, the ocean is full of solutions. Ocean habitats of the Maldives include mangroves, coral reefs, seagrasses, beds that provide cost-effective and less risky nature-based solutions with win-win benefits of mitigation and adaptation. These blue carbon ecosystems are some of the world's most efficient absorbers of carbon dioxide and long-term carbon sinks. It was in this background that I did my postgraduate research to determine the potential of Maldives' blue carbon ecosystems, including the seagrass beds and mangroves. I used global data sets, and my findings suggest that there's a realistic and strong possibility that the carbon sequestration potential of our mangroves and seagrasses could, in total, offset national emissions. This presents us with a very unique opportunity at a very pivotal time as we explore climate mitigation strategies to achieve our carbon neutrality pledge. These seagrasses and mangroves should not only be thought as carbon sinks, but they also provide valuable ecosystem services, extensive core benefits to communities. They provide coastal protection, they improve water quality, and they act as nurseries for crucial biodiversity. All of these things which help our coastal communities like us enhance our national economies. The next steps for the Maldives will be to explore the possibility of including these ecosystems in our NDCs. In order to do this, we have multiple steps that we have to get to. We need to reduce some of the scientific uncertainty by quantifying the exact carbon content and the rate of accumulation within these mangroves and seagrasses. Currently, the global supply of certified blue carbon credits is far outpaced by increasing demand. Some key factors that I think are high quality blue carbon development relate to ecosystem complexity, knowledge gaps, and unique funding needs. The research gap has now closed considerably. Robust methodologies now exist, but must still be socialized and adopted. The Maldivian government is now in the process of formulating our marine spatial plan, which allow for a more strategic and a sustainable use of our common natural resources. We are also designating one island, one coral reef, and one mangrove in each of our atolls as a protected area, thereby establishing over 70 protected areas in our national waters. I also think it is very crucial to bring the private sector into this domain. Some projects in the Maldives are looking at facilitating tourism businesses' knowledge of blue carbon and create clear pathways for protection, management, and restoration of these habitats. For too long, ocean habitats have been largely absent from at least from the UNFCCC system, but the tide is turning, and I hope that blue carbon is given the recognition it deserves. And that countries consider blue carbon ecosystems as key part of their mitigation actions. But I want to end on the note that we have to be cautious with how we frame this narrative of blue carbon as a solution for climate action. The mitigation potential of blue carbon ecosystems should be seen as supplementary to the immediate and urgent requirement to reduce emissions within this decade to stay at 1.5C target. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So I'm Paul Beckwith, and I'm going to mostly pose some questions for the other panelists about some of these techniques, but I'll just briefly say that the concept of climate restoration, I think, is going to become more and more important as time moves forward, because they're all focused on, right this year, for example, on adaptation and loss and damage to the global south. Every different COP seems to have a theme, and I'd like to make a prediction that I think about COP 33 or so, the whole topic of that COP will be climate restoration, talking about techniques such as these ones that we've been describing today. And if these things are implemented and scaled up, then you know, hopefully the last COP we'll ever need to have is, say, COP 48 or so. If we draw down CO2 and stabilize the atmosphere. I mean, I agree with Peter Fiakowski in his climate restoration book that any technique that will be used and be useful, it has to be scalable. That's pretty obvious. It has to make an effect on the concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere on a global scale. It has to be permanent, right? If you do something which you know, is not permanent, then as soon as you stop doing it, you don't want the climate to jump back to a state, you know, because then you can have even more problems than you had initially. And it should be self-financeable. It should pay for itself. So, for example, you know, kelp has a big advantage because you could use about half of the kelp that is grown could sink to the seafloor, trapping carbon on the ocean bed, and the other half could be used for commercial applications. You know, it's used in shampoos and soaps and all kinds of different things. So it should pay for itself. So a couple questions I'm wondering about is, you know, you hear about direct air capture. It doesn't really make a difference if we, from a climate perspective, if we take the CO2 out of the atmosphere or if we take it out of the oceans, because there's a very rapid exchange of gases between the ocean and the atmosphere at the surface of the ocean, at that interface. So if we remove CO2 from the atmosphere, eventually it will reduce in the oceans, and then the ocean acidification will lower. If we remove it from the oceans, it will eventually be lowered in the atmosphere. So I guess the question is I have a gut feeling that it's a lot easier to remove CO2 from the oceans than it is from the atmosphere. So I think DOC will be a lot more efficient than DAC. So maybe somebody can answer that question. The other thing is some practical questions, engineering questions, like, okay, so we have limited number of coastlines around the world. So if we're focusing on kelp and those coastlines, that can only do so much. So if we want to scale up kelp, it was mentioned that, well, maybe have kelp in the deep ocean. So in order to have kelp in the deep ocean, you need some sort of platforms to support it, maybe down to about 100 meters. And if in order to grow kelp, if you just put platforms in the ocean, mid-ocean, say between near the equator, maybe plus or minus 10 degrees in latitude from the equator, that's the best place because you don't have hurricanes in that band around the equator. So do you need to just put the supports there and you can start growing kelp on it, or do you need to change the chemistry of the water a bit by maybe getting phytoplankton growth, microplankton, microalgae growing first, and then work your way up the marine food chain and then get the kelp. So those are just some of the questions that come to mind. I mean, we know kelp can grow 2 to 3 feet a day. On land, people have talked about bamboo plantations because bamboo is one of the fastest growing plants on land. But as far as in the ocean, is concerned, the kelp have a huge advantage because they don't need stems to support their weight. They have little buoyancy chambers on the leaves, so they just float off the bottom. So kelp is a great idea.
Thank you so much. We have time for an answer, hopefully, to that question.
So I'll just address the question regarding, for example, direct air capture. If you're going to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, you've got one of two choices. One is you need to have a lot of area and use natural flows, or you have a limited area and you use energy fans to go and get the air moving across that surface. One of the advantages of the ocean, it covers 70% of the Earth's surface. Actually, we have a huge amount of area, so the natural exchange that you therefore have between the atmosphere and the ocean is one of its great attributes. And the mechanism by which you're then going to remove the carbon dioxide in effect from the ocean, for example, by growing things, you're really deriving massive benefit from the incredibly natural area already provided. So that's a key feature, Paul, that I would really sort of herald as why we think ocean-based carbon dioxide removal needs a lot further investigation. It has great potential.
Thank you so much. I'd like to see if Brad, if you have anything to add to that.
So I would echo Shaun that the ocean has enormous upside potential, but we are in our infancy in understanding how these accelerated carbon removal technologies might work and how they might scale. It's not just science, it's engineering, it's economics, it's social and political considerations, governance, et cetera. We're not putting anywhere near enough time and effort into what is an area that has a great deal of potential. We don't want to leave the impression that any of these things have been figured out yet, because they haven't, but we haven't invested in figuring them out. We need to really ramp up a whole range of controlled field trials across every single pathway that's been mentioned, with very clear external third-party monitoring and verification, transparency in all of the data, so that we can produce information for the policymakers at bodies like UNFCCC to determine where are we going to get this massive carbon removal that is not negotiable.
Thank you so much. That about wraps it up. And I would like to thank everyone who shared on the panel, and also Sustainable Population Australia as well. And thank you so much for giving us hope for the future. It sounds really great, the work you're doing. So much appreciated.